My Father's Affair with the Wall. No dogs, no cellos. He must have cared for it very much, because he spent so much time with it. They communicated in silence, like lovers, and whatever was said was private. I sometimes imagined my father, in intimate telepathy, sharing all his secrets, his hopes, and dreams with the wall, confiding his aspirations and the disappointments that he never spoke of to us. He was not usually demonstrative, and when I was a kid, we got along poorly. He held close a lot of rage to cover his anxieties, but sometimes it erupted in unexpected outbursts, which were alarming. As for me, I suppose I did a lot of acting out as a youngster. I have a distinct memory of raised voices and light punishment with my father's leather belt. But later, he always denied that. For some reason, after I was married, my father's relationship with me improved. In the years that followed, whenever we met, my father hugged me vigorously. I was surprised at the strength in his arms, and I guess I wondered where all those hugs had been when I was a kid and needed them instead of the belt. I was about 10, and we lived in an upstairs duplex apartment, from which I kept close tabs on the 3 cute flight attendants who lived across the way. They had a sweet, adorable Norwegian elk-hound puppy I used to play with when they came home. I walked her back and forth, out in front so they could see how conscientious I was. I tried to flirt with them a little, and I badgered them to give me the puppy since I'd be able to spend more time with her. I promised she'd get the best of care. They resisted at first. They obviously loved the little dog, but I was relentless, and they finally capitulated. My father helped name her Fleeka, after the movie My Friend Fleeka, which was actually about a horse. I played with the puppy after school, and my mother and I fed her, but she seemed to irritate my father. At the time, we couldn't have known how the presence of a puppy might have upset his status quo, his delicate balance. In the normal course of events, Fleeka tore up and chewed up and messed up, and my father was furious. None of us seemed to have the vaguest idea of how to raise and train a puppy, or had the instinct for it, and the brief walks we took did little to help her learn proper household decorum. When Fleeka made a mess, my father went after the confused little dog with a folded newspaper, whacking at it as it dodged away, yelping. It learned to take refuge behind a big wing chair in a corner, and defended itself the only way it could, by growling and snapping at the threatening object as my father wielded it. The more the puppy snapped and bared its teeth, the more frustrated my father became. The more vicious the dog seemed to be, the more intent my father became on punishing it. Soon, she was growing bigger and seemed truly threatening. I often visited my friend Dinky and his Aunt Ruth, who lived close by, and I must have mentioned what was happening at home. Ruth was kind and gentle, but with a take-charge manner. Without knowing the details, she suggested that Fleeka's temperament might improve if she was spayed, and she volunteered to see to it. My parents agreed, I suspect with some relief. My father couldn't or wouldn't be bothered. My mother didn't drive. I remember clearly Ruth bringing the dog home from the vet's in the trunk of the car. The poor thing was cowering when Ruth lifted the trunk lid, its midsection wrapped in a wide white bandage. She made a good recovery, but finally, with mixed emotions, we gave Fleeka away to a loving family Ruth recommended. My father slept late on Sundays, a symptom, I suppose, of his depression, and as kids, we were instructed not to wake him. When we had to go, my brother and I peed into an empty glass milk bottles while he lingered in the bathroom, a convenience denied to my mother, who later on developed a severe bladder infection. We always called a warning through the foreboding closed door. "Dad, there's a bottle." It became increasingly apparent that any changes in his surroundings heightened my father's anxiety. We tried to adapt to his dynamic mood swings, and through the years, there were other signs of his manic depression, which we weren't competent to recognize. Meanwhile, all the time, I loved my father very much. I knew he was essentially kind and decent. We incorporated the words gentle man on his tombstone, and as an adult, I came to understand that he wasn't responsible for his mishigas. He just couldn't help it. When he lived with us during his last few years after my mother died, he spent a great deal of time cutting out and filing in contest entry forms, Publishers Clearinghouse, Reader's Digest, and mailing them diligently so that he could make a killing and create a legacy. He cut them out and filled them in meticulously until his handwriting grew shaky and his eyesight began to fail, perhaps from struggling with all the fine print. But he never won anything. Earlier, he must have been in his 60s, my mother would phone me from San Francisco to say, "Sonny, I don't want you to worry, but he's doing it again." "Doing what, Mom?" "Staring at the wall. He just sits there and stares at it for hours. But please don't worry." It took some doing, but we finally persuaded my father to seek help, and he began meeting with a series of psychiatrists. He confided very little in their sessions, they told us, but they were able to diagnose his condition and eventually balance his medications so he could function more or less normally. At our house, I helped with his extensive pill regimen as calmly and matter-of-factly as I could. Once, in a manic phase, my father, who loved serious music but never played an instrument, phoned to announce exuberantly that he was going to buy a cello and take lessons. His elation frightened and confused my mother, but he was especially endearing then, and I was sorry it never happened. During treatment, a young woman therapist nearly overdosed him, and for several difficult days he had to be hospitalized. My brother flew in, and I remember him rushing down the corridor towards Dad's room, looking stricken and afraid. In spite of the therapist's clumsy efforts and the hospital's grudging cooperation, they wanted to release him immediately, my father recovered. He managed to survive fairly well until he really started to decline in his 87th year. His hands shook, he mostly slept in front of the TV, and he lost interest in eating. I learned what that was like years later when I became severely depressed. Sometimes he needed help at night, which must have horrified him. When he had trouble breathing, I drove him to emergency, where they kept us waiting for a long time after propping him up, fully clothed, in a bed. I seem to remember asking him if he wanted heroic measures. Did someone tell me to do that, or could I have done it on my own? And I seem to remember him nodding yes. So I made them hold on to him as long as I could, with all the tubes running into him. Finally, I let him go, all hooked up, miserable and unconscious. Thinking about it long afterwards, it didn't surprise me that he had been uncommunicative in his therapy sessions. My father simply had nothing left to say. He told everything to the wall.